Is gambling quietly pulling you out of your own life? You can still show up, be busy, function, and yet feel strangely absent while everything looks fine. But you feel like you're just going through the motions more than actually living them. If gambling's been feeling less like entertainment and more like something that's pulling you away from the things that matter, this video's for you. I've spent a decade listening to people describe what gambling does to their inner life, what it gives them in the moment, and what it quietly takes away over time. And once you hear that pattern enough times, it becomes hard to unsee. In this video, I want to show you why gambling keeps pulling you back even when you don't want to gamble anymore. And I'll show you why recovery breaks down when it's just treated as a willpower problem. Because this really isn't just about the money. And it isn't really just about self-control. It's about what happens when a person becomes unreachable, disconnected from others, disconnected from themselves. The way most people try to recover keeps missing the thing that matters. Because people don't return to gambling because they're weak. They return because it worked. It worked the way painkillers work. It worked the way fantasy works. For a moment, you felt less, or you felt something better. And when a person has been living with pressure or emptiness or shame, even a moment of relief can feel like fresh air. So the brain learns this is where you go. This is the door you open when the room you're living in begins to feel too tight. And over time, that door becomes familiar. Then it becomes necessary. Then it becomes the only door you trust. Because gambling isn't just something you do. It starts shaping the conditions of your life. It asks for secrecy, not always in an obvious way. Sometimes it starts as small edits, a softened version of the truth, a vague explanation, a quick lie that you tell yourself doesn't count. Then the edits multiply. You stop mentioning things. You stop answering certain calls. You stop going to certain places because you don't want the questions. And you start living like someone who's hiding something. And when you start living like that long enough, you don't just hide the gambling. You become less reachable. And this is one of the cruel ironies of gambling addiction. It can begin as a way to cope with loneliness or pressure. And then it manufactures even more loneliness and more pressure. It solves the problem by deepening the soil the problem grows in. I've seen this pattern so many times. A person will say, I don't want to gamble anymore. And they actually mean it. Then they'll say, but I keep getting pulled back. And that pull isn't always about money. It's about a certain kind of feeling. If your world feels unstructured, gambling helps it feel structured. If your world feels out of control, gambling gives you the illusion of control. If you feel isolated in your daily life, gambling can feel like companionship. A companion that doesn't demand anything of you. There's a line by Johann Hari that goes like this: the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And people say that line and it can sound like a slogan. It can sound soft, but I don't mean it softly. I mean it like this. Addiction pulls you into a private, disconnected world. Connection pulls you back into the human world. The human world has friction, it has timing, it has disappointment, it has repair. It has the reality of other people. The private world has none of that. The private world is clean. It's just you and the device. So when you try to recover completely on your own, you're trying to let sunlight in without ever opening the blinds. There's a sociological way to explain what's going on here, and it's not abstract, it's actually painfully practical. Emil Durkheim talked about two forces that stabilize human life. Think of them like two dials. One is integration. That's our bonds, sense of belonging, our sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves. Turn it too high and you disappear into expectations. Turn it too low and you're alone. The other dial is regulation. That's our structure, limits, a sense of direction, knowing what's expected and how to move forward. Turn it too high and life becomes rigid, but turn it too low and life loses shape. When these dials are balanced, people can still suffer, but the suffering is contained by a sense of meaning. Because as Viktor Frankl said, suffering without meaning is despair. But when connection and structure are present, the pain is still real, but it's just held differently. When gambling becomes a refuge, it quietly turns both of these dials way down. The noise of life fades for a moment, but so do connection and direction. And without a meaningful outlet outside of gambling, desire grows teeth. It stops being a simple want. It becomes a restless desire without a place to land, a hunger without an object. Durkheim had a phrase for this. He called it the infinity inside of desire. Not poetic infinity, a torturing infinity. The feeling that nothing is ever enough. And that's the gambling experience in one sentence. A win that doesn't land. A relief that evaporates. A moment of hope that collapses into again. And people often ask, why wasn't the win enough? But that question assumes the win is the point. Sometimes the real point is the state, the trance, the narrowing, the removal of self-consciousness. Natasha Dow-Schul calls this the machine zone. It's a place where nothing is required of you except to keep going. A flow state where decisions feel automatic. A place where you don't have to be a person for a while. You don't have to decide anything. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to manage anyone else's emotions. There's no past to fix, no future to plan, just the next moment. And for a while, the noise goes quiet. The questions stop. The feeling of being behind or failing or disappointing someone, all of that fades. And that relief is real. That's why it works. And once you understand that, something important clicks. Because it isn't really just about gambling. It's about how humans use repeated actions to change how they feel. This is why gambling can start to function like a ritual. A repeated action that changes your state. A doorway to somewhere else. The same time of night. The same chair. The same bathroom break. The same swipe. And the same checking. You can call it a habit, you can call it a compulsion, but either way, it's doing what rituals have always done for humans. It takes the inner chaos and gives it a sequence. It makes you feel held. But it's a counterfeit kind of holding. It holds you in the way a vice holds something. Tight, cold, effective. And then comes the shame. Because shame is not just a bad feeling. It's a social emotion. It's the feeling that if people really saw you, you would lose your place. Your place in their eyes. Your place in your own eyes. So shame makes you hide. And hiding makes you isolated. And isolation makes that private world feel even more necessary. This is the loop. Pain or emptiness shows up. Gambling offers relief and absorption. Shame follows. And then shame demands secrecy. But secrecy shrinks your world. And a smaller world produces more pain. So gambling returns as the solution. That's why willpower is such a frustrating tool. Because willpower treats this like it's purely a decision problem. But a lot of gambling addiction is not a decision problem. It's an environment problem. It's a relationship problem. It's a meaning problem. And it's a time problem. Let me explain the last one. Because time is a strange thing when you're addicted. The present can feel unbearable. Not dramatic, just unbearable. Too much self-awareness. Too much regret. Too much reality. So the mind starts living in the next moment. The next bet. The next win. The next chance. A philosopher might call it an escape from the weight of being. The weight of this exact moment. This exact life. This exact set of consequences. And gambling comes in and promises a future you can inhabit. Even if it's just imagined. The win that makes you whole. The win that repairs everything. The win that proves something. The psychologist Viktor Frankl wrote that meaning is not something you manufacture by just thinking. Meaning shows up when you feel called by something outside yourself. A responsibility, a person, a task, or a love that asks something of you. Addiction shrinks your world. It keeps you orbiting yourself. Not because you're selfish, but because you're trying to survive. But survival without meaning turns into a kind of floating, and floating is dangerous. Floating makes the intensity feel like purpose. So when people talk about connection being the opposite of addiction, I want to be precise. Connection is not just a vibe. It's not just a warm feeling. And it's not some personality trait like extroversion. Connection is reachability. It means there's at least one place where you're not managing an image. Connection is consistency, a place you can return to, a person who knows the pattern, a rhythm that holds you when you get shaky. Connection is mutuality, and this matters because the private world of gambling is a world with no real other. It's just you and an object. The philosopher Martin Buber made a distinction that explains this. He calls it the I-it versus the I-thou relation. I-it is how you relate to something you're trying to manage, like a thing, a system, or a problem. In addiction, I-it is not just how you relate to gambling. It becomes how you relate to yourself. You start treating your inner life like an object, not a life to listen to, but a solution to handle. Instead of asking, what am I feeling right now? You ask, how do I get rid of this? Anxiety becomes a nuisance, shame becomes a fire to put out, and stress becomes something you have to outrun. So you don't meet yourself, you manage yourself, and then it spreads outward. Because you're managing yourself, you start managing other people too. Not necessarily in a controlling way, but in an impression management way. You present a version of yourself that looks fine, functional, and together. You edit the story, you soften the truth, and you keep the mask in place. And the more you manage the impression, the more alone you become inside your own life, even if you're surrounded by people. I-thou relations are different. It's what happens when you stop relating to yourself like a mere problem, and you let yourself be real with another person. The humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers said, people don't heal by force. They heal when the conditions become fertile for growth to emerge. I got a message from a viewer that captures this perfectly. He said he believed he can quit gambling on his own by sheer willpower. But after hitting another low, he finally opened up to his partner. And not just about gambling, but what was underneath it. The stress he'd been carrying, the pressure, the restlessness, the difficult parts of his week he kept hiding and calling himself fine. He asked her to take control of the finances for a while, and he said the impact was immediate. The cycle that kept resetting was finally disrupted. Once he had an outlet for those stressors, he could finally name what was happening inside him and be met with steadiness instead of going into secrecy. Then the desire to gamble started to lose its grip, because gambling was no longer the only doorway out of the pain of his inner life. He could now cope with the underlying pressure in the human world. Nothing magical happened, and he didn't become a different person overnight, but he stopped doing the I-it relation and moved to the I-thou relation. He gained presence, mutuality, a shared reality. And when that happens, the system reorganizes. Here's a metaphor I like that explains this in a very practical way. Living things don't grow because they're yelled at. They grow when conditions support growth. In the dark, a plant doesn't choose to twist and shrink. It adapts. When light enters, it starts to reorient. Slowly, but naturally. When secrecy lifts, something inside you does the same thing. You don't have to force your way into healing. You just have to stop doing it alone. And often that starts with one honest sentence that changes the conditions. You become reachable again. And that's why isolation is so dangerous for gambling addiction. Because the addiction doesn't just like isolation. It becomes more persuasive inside of it. In isolation, thoughts sound like facts. You might think, I have to win it back, or just one more. This time I'll stop. Nobody can help me, or I've already ruined everything. What's the point? But in connection, those thoughts can be held up to light. Not argued with, just held and noticed. You can spot the inner critic, thank it for trying to protect you, and redirect your focus toward one meaningful act. Connection doesn't magically fix you, but it slows the spiral down enough for you to start choosing something else. So let's talk about what rebuilding the human world actually looks like. Rebuilding connection starts with one thing, a crack in the secrecy. Just the smallest true sentence. It might start with the phrase, I've been struggling, or I've been gambling more than I've admitted, or I'm not doing as well as I look. These sentences make you reachable, and being reachable is not just emotional relief. It's a structural shift. It turns addiction from a private ritual to a shared reality. And a shared reality is where recovery grows. And if you don't have a person in your life you trust right now, you don't have to wait. This is where groups like Gamblers Anonymous can come in. Because groups create integration and regulation. They create a place for you to show up, a time to show up, a rhythm. They create a world where honesty is ordinary. And that matters more than people realize. When honesty becomes ordinary, shame loses its hold. Shame survives by making you feel uniquely flawed and that nobody can understand you. But the moment you hear 3 other people describe the exact pattern you've been through, shame starts to look less like a fact and more like a symptom. Connection is not only about receiving help, it's about being needed. And this is one of the missing ingredients in modern life. A lot of people feel like they're optional, replaceable at work, invisible online, detached in their own home. Being needed in a healthy way does something to a person's nervous system. It gives you a reason to stay in the human world when the private world calls. A place to be, a role to inhabit. When I talk about recovery, I often think of the word home, and not in a sentimental way. Home as a moral space, a place with commitments, a place where your presence matters, a place where you don't have to edit yourself to be acceptable, a place where you can be seen. And that kind of home is the opposite of being in the private world of gambling. So if you're watching this and you've been trying to quit in private, I want you to hear this clearly. Your desire to handle it alone, it makes sense. Opening up can feel heavy, but it starts with one small, honest move that changes the conditions, and a lot of people tell me they feel a lot lighter afterward. Shame says to wait until you're better, to show them the healed version of you, to earn your way back. But that voice keeps people stuck, because it keeps them hidden. The human world is not something you re-enter when you're perfect. You re-enter it while you're still shaky. So when people say the opposite of addiction is connection, I don't just hear a slogan. I hear a map. A map back to visibility. A map back to home. Gambling turns you into someone who can't be reached, but recovery turns you into someone who's reachable again. And if you don't yet have a place where you're comfortable opening up, I'm building a private online recovery community for that reason. Not a place to perform healing, not a place to prove anything. Just a steady, human space where being real is enough. If you'd like to be a part of it, you can click the link below to stay in the loop as it takes shape. And if you're looking for more direct one-on-one support, there's a way to reach me below as well. But for today, just keep it small. Make yourself reachable in one concrete way. One sentence, one message, one honest moment that changes the conditions. Because that's how this starts.